Hi, welcome to my presentation for Core Project 4, where I'll be detailing the project. We basically end up using NCVIPS as a base, which is a project that I personally led. So, to quickly go over what we'll be talking about today, we'll be talking about the first section, record, which is the details of the project, sort of why we're doing this, what we hope the outcome to be, and also the details of the team, so who was who, and their roles and responsibilities. Then moving on to analyze, sort of how the project was managed, what strategies and procedures I implemented, and what methodologies, and also what tools I use and why I use these. And then reflect, which is was this the correct approach? Did I make the correct decisions? Sort of what were the downsides? What were any flaws or issues? And also what was good about it? What was particularly worked well? And then action, sort of what changes can be made in the future? What can we keep the same? What can we improve? What can we add to? And what can we completely get rid of? So to move on, record. So the service National Data Opt-out, otherwise known as NDOP, was built in 2017, and it was built by an outside team that was contracted by the NHS. And this is a team that had no involvement with the actual NHS. It was just sort of given to them, and they were told to build it within half a year. So the NHS itself had no real technical input into it, other than just some standard requirements as to what the service should be able to actually do. And then this service was then given to us to maintain without any sort of knowledge, proper handover process. So it became quite difficult for us to actually really maintain it. So the service was built with no real longevity in mind by these outside contractors. And this means that the service has now become very outdated in terms of NHS standard for web application use interfaces, and obviously behind on sort of the technical standards and a lot of industry standards for tools such as like Dependabot, which helps to keep dependencies up to date and make sure that they're not vulnerable. And then also sort of the NHS system architecture. So the code base is obviously very different to what we actually work on and sort of how we implement things. And it's got a very different architecture and a very different design. So it's obviously very difficult for us to sort of work on it and understand it and get to grips with it. And because the project hasn't been updated since 2018, it's quite old, and there's a lot of security concerns and a lot of incidents, especially around sort of the old services and tools used, and a lot of the old dependencies which might be vulnerable now and have vulnerabilities built into them, and the incidents in production where people can't actually use the service and it can't really handle high traffics and high volume. So as you can see, the top two screenshots are the existing NDOP service, and the bottom two are a different service which is called the National COVID Vaccination Invitation Preference Service. This is a service that we built during the COVID pandemic, during lockdown, which helps people to set whether they want to receive text by the government for invitations to take the COVID vaccination. And so, because the two services are quite similar in the sense that they both set a sort of preference for the patients, and they're both patient facing and they're both web applications, we thought, why not take this old, outdated, difficult code base, migrate into a new project with the same exact sort of functionality, the same actual service, but use the code from NCVIPS because the services are similar, and then change what we need from NCVIPS to suit NDOP. The project was managed by myself, so I was the project manager, and we had Thomas Judd Cooper, who was our technical lead and developer, responsible for sort of creating an architecture and defining the technical side of the project. We have Andrew Ray, who's a developer who worked on that and helped out in sort of the technical development. Audrey Gunson, who was our tester, making sure that the system functioned as a whole, that it could keep up to date, and it was actually able to handle high volumes of traffic and also accessible for people, who are blind and so on. And obviously we had Yomi Solaru, who was our business analyst, who was responsible for sort of helping to elaborate pieces of work, give business context, and also gather feedback from stakeholders and present it to us, the team. So to move on, analyze. So I decided to use Agile as our way of working because I believe that focusing on continuous integration and ensuring that stakeholders are constantly in the team was the best way to make sure that we produce a service that's fitting for patients and stakeholders alike, and especially seeing as it's patient facing and it's something that people will actually see. I really wanted to make sure that things were accessible and easy to use as possible, and that we got as much feedback on things I decided that using Scrum as our implementation would be really good, because Scrum helps to keep things small, localized, and allows you to sort of take a massive goal and split into really small goals in your sprints, which are a lot more achievable and manageable. And so I decided upon using fortnightly sprints, which I would start the sprint by having a planning session, which I would define team goals, the sort of the goals of the sprint, and sort of what work would be planned in, what tickets would be planned in, and then at the end of the sprint, the final day, I would have a review session in which I would through the team, allow them to express any sort of grievances, any issues they had in the sprint, what they liked, what they didn't like, and sort of get some actions that I could take going forward, and sort of go, okay, this is what we'll do for future sprints, and sort of I think that really helped me inform sort of how we can improve the service going forward. Not only was I getting feedback from stakeholders about our service, but I was getting feedback from my team about the way I managed the project, which really helped me improve over time. And something I really like about Scrum is that you work very closely with your team. You get that real sense of team spirit, and also you get to make sure that you can deliver a quality project because you're sort of breaking down the units into small manageable pieces and making sure everything's thoroughly tested, thoroughly developed, and thoroughly reviewed, and so you're able to identify any issues and make sure that things are really up to standard. So I used tools like Jira and Confluence. um, Jira I mainly use to track work, write down tickets, which I can present to stakeholders and say, yeah, look, we've actually implemented this, and this is sort of the work that we have going on, and this is the things that we plan on doing, and also to then track the work that each individual team member was doing. And tickets like things like Confluence were used to sort of track any documentation, any processes, any sort of system architecture designs, all these sort of things that are important for the system, and making sure that we know what to do in case we need to hand over for whatever reason. And Slack and Microsoft Team are really good at helping sort of the communication side. Slack was used more informally to sort of help with giving a team member help or asking questions and these sort of things, whereas Teams was more formal communication process. You know, we used the team reviews, team sprint plannings, all these sessions, elaboration sessions, where we would talk about pieces of work. They would all occur on Teams, and anything that we needed to be recorded to make sure that we had a documented evidence of that would all be done in Teams. And I used Jira to create a Kanban board, which you can see in the image, which helped me visualize the progress of the tickets and sort of what was going on. And I could see the tickets at each different stage, sort of the sprint goals at the same time, and apply any filters that I needed to and who was assigned to what. And obviously I was responsible for also creating timelines for deliverables. So we had 3 key deliverables, upgrading NC VIPs to use a PDS5, which is an updated service that the NHS is now using. Recreate end-up, so this is the bit where we actually make the new end-up project and then use NC VIPs as the base. And then obviously the UI changes to end-up, so making sure that we can take any changes that we need to apply them to end-up to make sure it actually is the national data of that service and not just a clone of the national COVID vaccination immunization preference service. So those were the key deliverables, and creating a sort of timeline of that with around the 6 months that we had to do this project, from the start of February to the end of August. So to move on, talking about sort of any of the issues. So in the first few sprints, I found a lot of issues around the ticket elaboration, because we use a story point system. So we would size tickets based on story points for complexity, so how difficult the ticket would be. And we use the Fibonacci sequence as our sort of, what the size would actually be. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. But the problem was we didn't really know what a ticket that was a ticket size of 3 looked like at first, because we had never worked on the project. And also, it was difficult to gauge how complex a ticket would be, not knowing what future work, how complex that would be. So this caused us to be quite confused at the start, and the solution was, okay, first what we'll do is we will oversize tickets. So if something was a 3, we might make it a 5, and that way when we come into the sprint, we're not pressuring the team too much to get work done, and we're not undersizing, which makes things really difficult for the team because they can't, they can't get work done, and they're rushing to get work done, and it causes a drop in quality. So we oversized that first, but obviously this meant that towards the end of the sprint, in the last 3-4 days, there would be no work, which was obviously not effective and a massive waste of time and money. So we decided that going forward, what I did was create a reference board, which I would take a ticket and from the previous sprints, and which was a 3, and say, okay, this is what a 3 is, and then we can compare future tickets and elaboration sessions to that reference board and go, okay, well, if this ticket is a 3 and it was this complex, then we know that because this ticket is this complex, it's also a 3, and so forth, which really helped us in our elaboration sessions going forward. And then also what we had was we also had massive issues with priority shifts and absences, because in the NHS it's quite a volatile working environment, and there's obviously a lot of shifts within sort of what teams need to be working on, and so we would often be asked by management to change what we're working on to fix any urgent issues, and also because sometimes team members would be told to help other teams or to go away for a sprint. An example of this was our technical lead had to go help another team for a sprint, and also there were absences like annual leave or sickness, which I had not really accounted for as well. I wasn't tracking those, which meant that I often had to go back and retroactively change the sprint goals and sort of scrap work or stall work entirely, to make sure that the sprint goals were met and that we were being able to complete sprints and not overworking the team. Another disadvantage is that I found Scrum can often lead to teams losing sight of the bigger picture and projects getting drawn out. I found that while we were getting constant feedback and this was good for us, we would often then think about planning it into the next sprint and forget about what we were originally had planned in for that sprint. And so the project was getting drawn out, and we were constantly thinking, let's upgrade, let's do more, and adding to the project, and not really thinking about, okay, well, we have 6 months to deliver something. We have to give a viable solution, and so that meant that obviously we sort of lost sight of the bigger goal and the bigger picture, and we were sort of falling behind on deadlines a little bit at one point. But what I did really like about Scrum and Agile is that we had a very collaborative way of working. We had a really high understanding of each member's roles, and because we were all involved in every meeting and process and elaborations and reviews, we understand the business context as well as the technical context of things. So it was really good for us, and because we were really understanding of each person's roles and responsibilities, we would then be very comfortable in asking questions and asking for help and trusting team members to do what they've been, tasked with. So it was really good for us to create that strong team bond and relationship, and making sure that there's a constant communication. And then obviously we had really good interaction with stakeholders. Constantly kept them in the loop, constantly kept patients in the loop and gaining their feedback, which made sure that we were, creating a service that was designed for them and that was really beneficial to them. And that's something that it was accessible, it was usable, it was easy to use. And this helped us to improve our communication skills. We became really good at explaining things that were technical to non-technical and vice versa. So it was really good for us to improve using these sort of show and tells that we would have. So every fortnight we would have a show and tell where we would go through what we've done and sort of explain it, and we would then get feedback. Our business analyst, Yomi Slaughter, would then get feedback from those people, and that was really good for us. And because of this, we were acknowledged for our high velocity in sprint. So we were having, the velocity is essentially how many story points we completed in a sprint, and we had an average of 46 and a high of 67. And the NHS average, so across all teams, is 39, I believe, with a previous team high of 63, which meant that we'd obviously smashed the average and the previous high record. So we were, rightly so, praised and acknowledged for this by management and stakeholders alike. So moving forward, action. I think the key improvement I would make is that I would have to track absences and sort of make sure there's a team calendar to know when people are taking annual leave or when people are sick and these sort of things, or when people had to work in other teams. That way I could plan for those in advance in future sprints. I think another good thing would be is to create a roadmap, sort of the deliverables, sort of when we expect to work on them and how that would be over the 6 months. Share this with management and wider teams so that they can obviously tell me what their roadmap looks like and what they plan on having and how our team can factor into that. And so then I can plan in sort of any potential priority shifts or when we might need to work on other things, and that would sort of limit me having to change sprints and sprint goals and sort of scramble to get things done and scrap work and all these sort of things. I think another thing is that I'd like less intensive sprints. I found that while we were sort of effective in our sprints because we were making sure that work was being done right until the end of the sprint, we were also starting to get really intensive, and it was becoming quite pressure focused and quite stressful. And while we were able to handle it quite well, I think if the project lasted any longer and we stayed in that way of working, we might have started to see some high stress, some cracks, some burnout, and it wouldn't really have been good for the team. I think a way of stopping that is encouraging a more social environment, something with more, regular breaks, informal chats, maybe a team social every now and then, sort of get-togethers to sort of de-stress, relax and refresh, and come back, ready to work and not feel so burnt out and so overworked. And I think another good thing to do would be to create sort of use a Kanban style system. I think a Kanban approach can help you to sort of limit the work in progress, so that way you're not, working on too many things at once, and you're ensuring really good quality of a certain thing, like 2, 3 tickets at a time rather than 6, 7. And also, it's really helpful for project flexibility because you can sort of, if something does happen and you need to shift priorities or you need to bring something in, you can bring it in straight away. There's no sprint goals, there's nothing you need to specifically get done within 2 weeks. So it's really helpful for an environment like the NHS where things are really volatile and there's a lot of priority shifts. So that's quite helpful. And also because Kanban allows you to sort of deal with, requests and urgent issues, and you can be quite very communicative too. You can still get that benefit of the Scrum communication and whatnot, but at the same time making sure you're flexible as possible. So finally, in conclusion, I believe this project was successful. We had a desired output and we achieved it. The approach was obviously effective. We were praised by management. Told that we had a really good working style and we were really effective, and we obviously had a very high output. But it was not an effective approach. I think we had started to see some cracks, and it became quite stressful and full of pressure. So I think a more relaxed environment would have been better at some points. And I think the key takeaway is to make sure that we take these issues, these flaws, and sort of going forward try to improve and try different things so that we can understand what works best for us as a team. And finally, the new NDOP service is now live, and you can try it out for yourself as long as you're an NHS patient. There is no sort of requirements for trying it out. You just need to know some details, and you can feel free to go use it and set your national data preference. But anyways, that is the end of my talk, my presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please email me at my student email. Thank you. Bye.